I am Jeffrey Daugherty, and this is Unindoctrinate. Welcome back to another week of great podcast excellence here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And in fact, I'm back from Dallas, Texas, home of Odyssey Network. Was very happy to be a part of the Odyssey Radio booth at the Alien Con in Dallas, Texas. My back is not so happy, but I'm happy to be there, happy to be back home in the studio, bringing you another edition of Unindoctrinate. Today, we're going to talk about the assault on Aquarius. Angels and demons is the subtopic. And we're going to spend maybe a few days on this. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But basically, the idea here is that the 1960s were meant to be one of the great times of spiritual renewal in all of human history. Instead, it became a missed opportunity for the world to step into a new and higher realm of enlightenment in being. And it wasn't just by happenstance. It was because of the shadowy acts of nefarious groups. And even though it's important to realize what happened in the 1950s, or excuse me, the 1960s, the 50s into the 60s to be totally correct with you, it's still even more important to realize that these same tactics, because they proved so effective in the 1960s, are being applied to us again here 50 years later as we move and zoom towards 2020. The same groups employing the same tactics, and the reason, because they were effective the first time. So if something works once, then you want to keep trying it again. And I believe that I'll be able to show to you and hopefully inspire you to wake up and realize and fight against the same tactics that were used to assault Aquarius then are being used to assault you and I today towards the same end. We, I think, are at the same place that we were in the 1960s as far as renewal, enlightenment, about to turn a corner, about to go to another level. We're at that precipice of explosion spiritually. And the same shadowy people and agencies that stopped it then are going to be trying to stop it now. And to be forewarned, folks, is to be forearmed. That's why I'm trying to tell you about this here this week on Unindoctrinate. I want to tell you, I think probably, well, certainly for the first time, the full story of what happened, the full story of how it happened, and the full story of what it meant. This is a story based on a lot of inside knowledge that I have of one of the main characters in this shadowy story. That would be Elvis Presley. We'll get into the depths of that. And by the way, I just completed a podcast with Chris Jericho that'll be broadcast very soon on Talk is Jericho on the Westwood One network. So we want you to be looking for that. And thanks again to Chris Jericho for having me on. We talked about Elvis. We talked about the paranormal. We're not going to repeat that here, but we are talking about Elvis Presley and the effect that he had in the 1950s into the 60s. And then we'll move into Paul McCartney, John Lennon, the effect that they had. We'll get into John F. Kennedy, and we'll get into Charles Manson. It really is assault on Aquarius, and it really is angels and demons, folks. And sometimes it's hard to tell who's the angel and who's the demon. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty. This is Unindoctrinate. And, even though my back is hurting, I still feel like if this was something that was chronic and went on a long term, even though I'm almost better, I would call up my friends at STEM Light, because if you have chronic injury, if you have sickness, if you're really feeling the ravages of age, stem cell therapy can be just almost miraculous. And really, I would remove the almost and just say it can be miraculous, story after story. Go to jeffreydaugherty.com, click on the STEM Light logo, and you will receive 20% off your treatment when you use the word HEAL, H-E-A-L. If you're a doctor, why not work with the team that works with the National Football League Alumni Association. That's STEMlight. Go to Southern STEM, Doctor, southernstem.com. Again, use the word heal for very, very special arrangements and preferential treatment, if I may say. So what we're going to do is tell you a story, and tell you a story within a story, and tell you how that story is being repeated, and how what they did, the powers that started to be then, are still now, but are fading away. What they did to two of history's most beloved icons. We're going to talk about shadowy enemies that opposed these two gentlemen and that continue to oppose us today. It's the hidden true story, folks, of the battle surrounding the dawning of the age of Aquarius in the Western world. And you're getting in here exclusively on Odyssey Radio on Unindoctrinate. Now, you can go over to the YouTube channel, Jeffrey Daugherty, Christian Whistleblower YouTube channel, and see the full video version of these a day or two late, sometimes 3 days late, depending upon how busy I am and how much time I have to load up material. But you will see all of these Unindoctrinate shows eventually migrate over to the Christian Whistleblower YouTube show, where you can see them live and in color. And sometimes, believe me, got a face made for radio. But we're going to talk about the idea of a false flag. And most of us understand what a false flag is, but did you know that the origins of the word false flag is because it was first used by Navy vessels, and they would take down the flag of what they really are, what nation they really are, and use the flag of another nation as a ruse de guerre in the French before engaging the enemy. So they would think they were being attacked by one nation when in fact they were being attacked by another nation. But what we really think of as a false flag is operations that are carried out during peacetime by civilian organizations or covert governmental agencies that are false. They're called false flags because they seek to hide the real organization behind the operation. Now, I don't think that anyone before me has used the term cultural false flag. And I am suggesting to you tonight or this morning that the 1960s was a cultural false flag. All of the same earmarks of a false flag, but rather than one single event, it was the carrying out, the perpetrating, and the orchestrating of a series of events that would lead to the same result, a cultural false flag waged against specific private citizens who were very influential, so as to cause tremendous sea changes in the attitudes and actions of a great numbers of the general populace of the two greatest nations on earth, the two greatest democratic nations on earth. These operations were carried out during peacetime, ladies and gentlemen. Governmental, civilian, paragovernmental, covert agencies, all seeking to hide the real organizations behind these operations. It was a cultural false flag, the 1960s, and it was designed to prevent the dawning of the age of Aquarius in the Western world. And here we stand 50 years later, which I think is significant, 50 years later, and they're going to try to run the same game because they think it'll give them the same results because it worked once before. And I'm here to try to get us to unindoctrinate and to get to the place where we can see this coming and say, no, thank you. Names we've got to know. The Tavistock Institute, founded in 1946, claiming to devote itself to group and organizational behavior. It was the focal point in Great Britain for psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, and it has been long associated with conspiracies, long associated with mind control, long associated with thought police, long associated with torture and various means of mind control. And I think that you will find, as we go through this series, that it beggars description, literally, the things that took place under the auspices of the Tavistock Institute. And we're not just talking about one single place. We're using Tavistock Institute, and we'll use MK Ultra kind of as a umbrella term to encompass all types of mind control. Now, the Beatles and Paul McCartney have long been said to have been particular targets of Tavistock, and I do believe that they, in fact, were, specifically Paul McCartney. And I would say almost exclusively just Paul McCartney, although the other Beatles did live with the results, quite literally, and then had to deal with them long term when the group broke up. But we need to keep in mind Tavistock Institute, and we need to keep in mind MK Ultra. That's the CIA's mind control program, and it was all about experimentation on humans to develop drugs and procedures to be used in interrogation and in torture to weaken individuals, force confessions, and get people to do what the government wants them to do. And if you look at how the world was in 1960 and how it is in 2020, you've got to think that they've learned some things and they're getting their job done, because we're not where we need to be. It was organized, MKUltra was, through the Scientific Intelligence Division of the CIA, and there were projects coordinated with the Special Ops Division of the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps. Began in the 50s, which is interesting. Officially sanctioned in 53, which is interesting. Claimed that it was reduced in scope in 64, 67, and then halted in 73, which is complete garbage. But there were millions of unwitting U.S. and Canadian residents, and I will say British residents as well, that were its test subjects. It used, MKUltra did different methodologies to manipulate people's mental states, their brain functions, LSD, drugs, chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal, sexual abuse, different kinds of torture. And at its height, well, at its reported height in the 60s, because I think these numbers are well eclipsed by now, there were some 80 institutions, including 44 colleges, universities, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies. What a surprise. And the CIA typically operates through front organizations, and a lot of times the officials at those institutions are aware of the CIA's involvement. And the U.S. Supreme Court said that MKUltra was concerned with the research and development of chem, bio, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. Sounds like a cultural false flag, doesn't it, folks? The program consisted of 150 sub-projects. Oh, that's great. The agency contracted out to various organizations, and because the agency funded MKUltra indirectly, many of the participating individuals were unaware they were dealing with the agency, which I guess we would say was the CIA. And this opens, folks, the dark chapter of the Western Aquarius. And this is really where the story begins. And when I'm doing a difficult subject like this, I'm really happy that I'm doing it within the focused life force energy environment. Fluffy beams into your home or to your cell phone a more nurturing environment, which allows you to operate at your highest potential, allows you to think better, meditate better, pray better if you pray. Whatever you do in a spiritual or meditative means, Fluffy will make it better. Go to jeffreydaugherty.com. Click on the FLFE logo. It's right there next to the stem light logo, I believe, or right in the same neighborhood. And they will give you a great 15-day trial on the cell phone, as well as a 15-day trial at your home. And I'm willing to bet that you won't let them take it away from you. And it's very cheap, much less expensive than, let's say, a couple weeks worth of mediocre coffee from a national coffee chain, which we won't mention because there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the 1960s false flag began really on January 8th, 1935. How so, Jeff? Well, it was on January 8th, 1935, in a one-room ramshackle house on the wrong side of the tracks in Tupelo, Mississippi. A young man survived the death of a twin brother in birth and came into the world with the name of Elvis Aaron Presley. Elvis's family left Tupelo for a public housing project in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis was driving a truck for Crown Electric, and on the next show, I'll wear my Crown Electric shirt, and you'll be able to go over to the YouTube channel, Christian Whistleblower YouTube channel, and see that shirt and this show. And he walked into the Sun Record studio, where I've walked into, and he made the demo song that would change the world. It was a little 45. On one side was My Happiness. On the other side was That's When Your Heartaches Begin. And those song titles are strangely prophetic as we get into our story. And then he recorded a second demo that day. On one side was I'll Never Stand in Your Way, and on the other side was It Wouldn't Be the Same Without You. And talking about his life and talking about our subject at hand, you'll see how those things are very much prophetic. And within 3 short years of those demos, Elvis Presley would burst upon the world scene with the debut single, wait for it, of Heartbreak Hotel. Zoomed to number 1, 7 weeks on Billboard, 17 weeks on the country music charts at number 1, eventually certified double platinum. He was on the Steve Allen Show. He went on the Ed Sullivan Show. $50,000, which was a ridiculous amount of money in those days, for 3 appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show. He was quickly picked to star in a movie called The Reno Brothers, but between the time they named the movie and the time it came out, Elvis had another little song you might have heard of called Love Me Tender. So they changed the name of the movie to Love Me Tender, even though it didn't make any sense at all, but that's okay. So in 1956, Elvis placed more records in the top 100 than anybody had ever done since they started keeping those records. And the Wall Street Journal said that he had made $22 million in 1956 in record sales alone. To say that he was a cultural phenomenon is a big understatement. Elvis had literally changed the world. And he had changed the cultural scene too, folks, because one of the big things that people don't understand about Elvis Presley's music is this was the 1950s, 1956, heading into the 60s. And there was a deep, wide, and accepted divide between the races in the United States of America. Black people had their music. White people had their music. Here comes Elvis Presley. And his music was kind of like black people music, and black people really liked it. And Elvis's music was white people music, and white people really liked it. And all of a sudden, you had not black people music and white people music. You just had people music. And it's my belief that Elvis and his music were instrumental in the beginning of dismantling the wall of separation between whites and blacks in the United States of America. His music transcended color. And I think it was the first time that many Americans ever had ideas or thoughts or even considered the idea of cultural color blindness. Elvis Presley was a powerful force for advancing the cause of human brotherhood and human equality in the United States of America. And if you think I'm crazy, Sam Phillips, who owned Sun Records, said the reason that, people came in there all day long making demos and nobody ever cared. But for some reason, it was Sam's secretary was playing Elvis's demo, and Sam heard it. And the thing that caught Sam Phillips' ear was that it was a white man that sounded colored. Because he asked her, "Who is that?" "Elvis Presley." "Who is he?" "Oh, some truck driver." What? And she got around. He said, "Oh, that's a white boy." So that's how the legend of Elvis Presley got started. And folks, one thing that you may not have known about Elvis's music is that it may well have been the music of Elvis Presley that first encouraged America to look beyond the color of a man's skin and into the content of his character. And as great and as powerful and as beautiful as that was, That's maybe the big thing, or one of the big things that brought Elvis to the attention of the dark lords of the New Age. Because not only was Elvis challenging the established idea of racial separation, Elvis was also stirring up the pots of individualism. Elvis was stirring up this idea of breaking societal norms. And he was even bringing out repressed sexuality in the country. And even though it was quite unintentional, he wouldn't even know what was going on. Those moves, those shake and all that stuff, completely unrehearsed, completely natural. I've talked with personal friends of Elvis. They all say, without exception, the same thing. Elvis never practiced that. He never put it on. It was just him. And he would come off the stage wondering, what happened, guys? And they would tell him, well, bro, you were doing this, you're doing that. He's like, no. And they're like, and he would watch himself, and he was almost embarrassed at himself. And he was having tremendous effects on teens. He was having tremendous effects on young adults. And he really was. And it's so hard for us to understand this in 2020, 2019. But he was the first real cultural champion of individualism and freedom of expression. It was the first time that people really thought, I don't have to be like my dad. I don't have to be like my mom. I don't have to look like they do. I don't have to act like they do. I don't have to talk like they do. I can look how I want to look. I can act how I want to act. I can sound how I want to sound. And Elvis was especially a problem to the establishment because not only was he the lovable rebel, he was a bad boy saying, do what you want to do, say what you want to say, act how you want to act, look how you want to look. But at the same time, he was polite. He was patriotic. He was respectful. He was a thoroughly likable young man. So here was this guy who was challenging the status quo, destroying the status quo, and yes, mammon, and no sir'n all the way through it. And I think that one of the things that caused the dark lords of Tavistock and MK Ultra to descend upon Elvis Presley with their fury was Ed Sullivan. He was had the biggest show on television. He and Walter Cronkite were probably the two biggest icons in America. And Elvis had 3 shows on Ed Sullivan's show. And at the end of that 3-show run, Ed Sullivan, in an unrehearsed moment, took the microphone and said these words, and this is a direct quote from Ed Sullivan. He said, I want to say that Elvis Presley is a real decent, fine boy. And wherever you go, Elvis, we want to say that we've never had a pleasanter experience on our show with a big name than we've had with you. So now let's have a tremendous hand for a very nice person. Beautiful, beautiful. And it put him in the crosshairs of the MK Ultra Tavistock New World Order. When we get back, more about the assault on Aquarius, angels and demons. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty. This is the Odyssey Radio Network, and this is Unindoctrinate. We'll be right back.